save them. You come and save yourself. The gods cannot be destroyed. The only path is to seek their favor.
Today we're talking about Hellblade 2 story and the overall game. So Hellblade 2 is the brand new Microsoft exclusive game that has been released, and it is a game that or series rather, that I came into very light in the game. I always liked the game, but never really played it until recently, the time, because part 2 was coming out, sit down, played part 1, loved it. Now part 2 is out. There's a lot of chat online about part 2. Some say it's a walking sim, some say it's not a very good game, and some people love the game. Which camp do I fit? I love the game. I think the game graphically is beautiful. That's not what we're here to talk about. Given this discussion and this view, we're going to start out with some issues that I had and then lean over to the things that I like, because the issues that I have is a more small list compared to things that I like, and I think is better to detail out the problems that are issues that I have. So one of the things that I did not like was closer to the end of the game, after we defeated the second giant, we basically had to walk through a forest. In this segment, my main issue with this segment is that we were just walking. We weren't solving puzzles, we weren't trying to find faces, we weren't trying to find the lore stones, we weren't doing any of that. It was just simply walking in one direction, got stuck, turn back around and walk. I think that segment was not done very properly. I think it could have been better by adding a bit of combat in between, and given the, I guess, mythos of that forest that is outlined in the story, it could have easily be added something of Senua's figment of Senua's imagination manifested while she was in the forest. They could have done something like that and have her fight that, like we did with some other segment of the game, So they could have used some of that here, where she could have some combat encounters and lean it into the story and reveal and kind of make it foreshadow something that happened closer to the end of the story. And I think that could have been a well done thing if they just added that combat segment there. I think it would be really good. I did not like that part at all, and could have been improved on. Apart from that, the crawling segment. Initially, when I was playing the game, I didn't mind the crawling segment when you're like crawling through the ship, crawling through the rock. I didn't mind those segments. But on the third playthrough, it got kind of annoying. Going through the settings, specifically the accessibility option, I think they could have put like an auto crawl there instead of the user had to crawl, because to be honest, on the third playthrough I was looking for something like that desperately, because as I said, it got annoying really quick on the third playthrough. Those are the two things that mainly stood out to me when I played the game. Note, I played all 3 narrators, so it's not one playthrough, it's 3 playthroughs I did. So the problems that I have is not necessarily because of my first playthrough, but just because of the subsequent playthroughs I did. It kind of stood out to me, these core issues. So let's jump over the things that I do like about this game. Tackle the performance. The performance of this game is great. One of the best day one performing games possibly I've played in a while. Like, day one is always a rough time for a lot of games, like bugs, crazy bugs, and whatever. But given the linear nature of this game and the very focused nature of this game, it was really great jumping in, and the game just works perfectly I didn't have to be tweaking settings that crazy. And I tweaked some of the settings eventually, especially as I got to more demanding segments. I had to turn on, change the FSR from balance to performance. And I had to, yeah, I think that's the only change. And I had to, well, not the only change. I then changed the textures from medium to high. Yeah, so I turned up the textures and it still was managing to hit 60 frames per second for most cases. The old timer kind of dropped below 60 frames per second. With that setting was when the second giant had to be fought, which was basically the one of the Game Awards showcase settings. So that was really cool to see. But that setting, that part of the game rather, the frame rate tanked to like 40 FPS and so forth. However, duly note that when I was doing my third playthrough and the standard setting I was on was medium setting, the overall global medium setting, I must say, and had FSR balance, that segment was FSR quality, FSR 3 quality. I was managing to like 50 FPS at 50 to 60 FPS within all the segments. Granted, I changed the overall graphic settings, like driver setting from default to quality on outside of the game. So when I got inside of the game, I think probably that kind of helped with the performance overall. So I think if I had dropped it to balance or performance, we'll be able to hit 60 FPS without any hitch for majority of the game, and I strongly believe that way. Another thing that I really loved about this game was the story. The story was good. However, the story wasn't as intimate as the first one, which is not like a knock, because usually games or even movies, any kind of medium that tells a story, the first one will always be the best. And I think that is kind of a situation we end up here, where it was good, and mind you, it was really, really good, but it wasn't as intimate, so it didn't feel as connected to as the first one. But apart from that, though, the story was really good. Overall, the acting was beautiful, the themology in the story was great, and the thought of not wanting to be something that you kind of feel like you have to be is very interesting to tackle it in the story. So I still tackle a very important and interesting message. I just think it wasn't as good, but I know that probably some people would find it more engaging and more interesting than the first story. So apart from that, the combat, let's jump to combat now. The combat felt great. I love the combat. I know in one of my videos, probably was the first impression, or one of the earlier playthroughs, or earlier parts rather of my playthrough, I said that the combat wasn't as responsive or wasn't as good as the first one. I kind of have a change of heart in that regards, because as I played more and more, I kind of understood the combat a bit more and what they were going for compared to the first game. One thing I'll say is clear that the first game was a more stylized combat, so it was more in line with fiction than reality in the first game in terms of the combat. In the second game, it leans very heavily on realism, and I think for some people who might like the combat from the first game may not enjoy the combat in this game because of that. And to be honest, it was kind of a whiplash for me, because I played the first game recently and then jumped over to the second game, thought everything was the same, and then felt a bit more sluggish than I was in the first game. So it forced me in the second game to be more intentional with my movements, with my blocking, with my parry. Well, I barely can catch a parry timing, but I try a lot. But in terms of movements, I have to be a lot more intentional in terms of dodging, blocking, and attacking. You can't just attack and hope for the best, especially because in this game too, when you block an enemy's attack, it kind of staggers you a bit, especially if it's a heavy attacks. That would definitely staggers you a lot, and it will leave you open to be attacked, which I find that was really good and really interesting, because it shows a realistic way of how someone of Senua's stature and build will be able to take on individuals that are clearly bigger than her, clearly stronger than her. Because of how realistic it was, I end up enjoying it more, because I understood that this was what really would have happened in real life. And I would still say check it out and see how it goes. Puzzles in this game, never felt annoyed while doing them. Was really good, and it felt a bit more simpler than the first game, especially in the earlier parts. Like the first puzzle was clearly simpler than the first game. But even the second puzzle and so forth, it didn't felt as difficult as the first game. Probably because I played it could be a case where I played the first game recently, because I did do that, and then come to this game, so everything is kind of muscle memory what I need to do, while the first game was like rusty, didn't know what it was about, so I was more inclined to take long on the puzzles than now, where I kind of understand the world, I understand Senua, I understand what she's looking for, so I was clearly, by that, I was able to figure out the puzzle a lot more quicker and move around a lot more quicker in terms of the puzzle. Even though there were a few puzzles that took a bit of a while, especially the one before the second giant fight. That puzzle took me a bit, very long than I would like to admit. But apart from that, though, the puzzles overall felt good. Didn't really feel like I was stuck at any point in time, or I couldn't figure it out, or it was impossible to figure out. I think how the puzzle was set, the pacing was really good in those, so I have no complaints with the puzzle. It didn't feel like filler, because I will say one thing before I go further. This game, it is structured exactly like the first game. In every way, every shape, this game is a one-to-one in terms of structure replica of the first game. You can recall in the first game there was an entire chapter without sword. We didn't go an entire chapter without sword in this one, but there was a segment or part of a chapter where we was without our sword, where we had to navigate in a dark area with monsters surrounding us or hunting us rather. So, and if you played the first game, you guys know what I'm talking about, how that correlates within the first game. Because that segment in the first game, I hated it. I hated that segment in the first game, but I like that segment in this game. Because one, you could actually see the monsters, which made it a bit more terrifying, while also not making it as terrifying. And because you could also see a surrounding too, that kind of helps. While in the first game, you couldn't really see a surrounding, you could only see the monster and a bit, and I say you know where not to go, and just try to avoid them and hope you find where you should go overall. But in this game, that segment was handled very well. I loved it. And then you got to you did get to fight the monsters eventually. And well, before that and after that point, you got to fight the thing, and it was really cool. So overall, the game has been really cool. The other thing that I really loved was the different narrators. The different narrators is pretty interesting. It didn't really change the game that much, I would say, and in some elements, it didn't add that much to the story. Some things you'd have already figured out before. If some things that is already implied or shown, or even it was easy to figure out in the first playthrough, but there are certain things, especially especially at the time, I guess, between the first game and now, things like that, like what Senua has been up to, was highlighted in one of the narrators, which was really cool. And also another thing that was highlighted in another, like one of the narrators, where basically other characters in different segments of the game was narrating, showing the motivation of these characters, what they think, what they were thinking throughout this situation, what they feared, why they decided to help Senua, and so forth, and why they sent Senua on the path that they sent her on, and so forth. So things like those you can get from the narrators, which if you love the story and you love the gameplay and you're willing to play that 2 more times, is really worth it, I would say. Just to get the overall full context and full understanding of everything that a game has to offer, it does help and work with the different narrators. So I would do recommend playing all 3. Apart from that, like, those are the things that I loved about the game, I like the story, and I'm the type of person that really like narrative heavy games, so I really did enjoy the narrative. And the only part that I really had a major problem with was, as I said, was like on the 3rd playthrough. I thought there were some things that they could have done better that started to show itself by the 3rd playthrough. But apart from that, the game, performance, graphics, combat, I loved it. The game overall, compared to the first one, they're 2 different styles in terms of combat, in in terms of directly to the combat. It's two different styles. Even the puzzles is a two different style of puzzle. So I think the first game is very unique in its own right with a more stylized combat. The second game is very unique in its own right with a more realistic combat. And still, both games are very enjoyable. I don't think any game is really better than either. I think Old Place, the second one is, I would say, is greatly better than the first one. Is the graphics, obviously. But I think each game stands on its own, and the first game will have the people who are more fan of that kind of combat where it's a lot more stylized, a lot more fantasy oriented, a lot more, I would say, even you kind of feel overpowered in a sense when you start to understand the combat in the first game, and it kind of give you that superhero status in the first game. While the second game, it felt like you were struggling, you were fighting for your life, especially if you don't get the parry time right, you'll be fighting for your life. And I think those kind of feeling is really good. And I think both have its merits. I think the first game have its merits to how the combat is handled, because they want you to feel like you can overcome these things. But in the second game, to me, I had the combat system, how the stories really kind of, they want to doubt yourself, doubt that you'll be able to overcome this fight. So you keep on struggling through and just kind of battling through. It kind of reflects life in a way. It's the second game. Combat, I ain't gonna lie. Overall, it's a great experience. I do recommend this game. I do recommend, if you have Game Pass, check it out. If you can afford to buy the game, buy the game. Whichever way you decide to play this game, I would recommend playing this game. The game is not a walking simulator. So with that said, guys, I would definitely recommend this game. Did you like the game? Did you hate the game? Let me know in the comment section down below. And do you think the game's a walking sim? Let me also know in the comment section below, because I didn't feel like this game had any more walking than the first game. But so it's just very weird of people saying that it's a walking sim, you know. But regardless, guys, thank you all for being here. Thank you for enjoying the content, watching so far, and see you guys next time. Please leave a like on the video if you haven't already. Subscribe to the channel for more content like this, and see you guys next time. Peace.